Hey, good morning. This is Joe from Citrus County Porchlight, bringing you another AA Word of the Day for January 10th, 2025. And the word for today is United We Stand. And this is the quote: We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery, the delusion that we are like other people what presently may be has to be smashed. And that is from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, page 30. I came to Alcoholics because I was no longer able to control my drinking. I was either it was either my wife's complaining about my drinking, or maybe the sheriff forced me to go to AA meetings, or perhaps I knew deep down inside that I couldn't drink like others. But I was willing to admit it because the alternative terrified me. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women united against a common fatal disease. Each one of our lives is linked to every other, much like survivors on a life raft at sea. If we all work together, we can get safely to the shore. Very early on, from the start of my time in AA, I I fully conceded that I was an alcoholic because my work on finding a safe way to drink was based on the idea that I was an alcoholic. But I didn't really have any idea of the implications of saying I am an alcoholic, that I had a disease. And people say it's just willpower. Other people push the disease model. I happen to believe in the disease model. We can't explain the origins, but that doesn't mean people during the plague saw people dying. They couldn't explain it. They thought it was, something in the air, and it was, but they didn't know what organism it was, and and that's been true all along in history. You're presented with a problem, and you don't know what it is. I can remember as a kid in 1955, the big polio scare. And in that case, by that time, they had figured out what was causing it. And luckily, that year, Dr. Salk uh, came up with the vaccine and stopped it in its tracks. And thank God, so many children haven't suffered from it since that time on. So I don't. Is it nature or nurtured? Is it a genetic fault? Is it caused by your environment? Uh, it's kind of like you're going 80 miles an hour and into a wall, and you're trying to think how that could happen when you should be trying to think of how you can get out of the situation. So you can only. I played those mind games for a good 5 years. How I would be the one to find a way to drink safely, and it amounted to nothing, a hill of beans. But as I grew in AA, and believe me, I saw prior prior. I lived in a very poor section of town, and you'd see people die. There'd be bodies, and find out the guy was an alcoholic and just, uh, he wasn't eating good. And people said, "Well, yeah, that's why he died." But see, alcoholism will kill you. The common phrase is jails, institutions, or death. That's where you end up. And so I began to learn more about the disease process. And then when I went to nursing school to learn about more about the disease process and why they think it is a disease uh, and not just willpower, is let me mature in my understanding of alcoholism and how my approach, how and why it never worked all that time. It says here I couldn't drink like others. I couldn't. I had friends that would drive me crazy. Yeah, I'd go to a cookout at their house, and they would sit there with a bottle of beer and sip on that thing for maybe an hour. Or if they had a can, they'd put it in one of those styrofoam can holders so it wouldn't get cold, and then that would be enough for them. I never, ever, ever in all my life ever thought that way. And even when I went to parties like that where people were doing non-alcoholic drinking, I always had 2 cases in my car just in case I ran out. I'd bring 2 6 packs in a cooler to a cookout and make sure I had plenty of ice in the trunk with the other in case I ran out. And that's not normal. Although I hung around with certain people that drank like that, and get that let me rationalize it in my mind that the kind of drinking that I was doing was normal. Particularly when I went, my bank bought out by Bank of Boston, the bank that I worked in Rhode Island, and I went up to Boston. Those guys went out all the time. I said, "See, there's nothing. This is the way people live." When I went to Roy's Tap, my favorite bar, it was mostly just guys there. Very few women showed up. Well, women would call wanting to know if their husband's there. And when you walked into the bar, there was a big chalkboard, and you put your name, like I put Joe G. I mean, I wasn't married then. I put Joe G. And if someone called looking for me, boom, he would say, "No, he's not here." And it was like a respite for guys to get away from their family. Or sometimes for them to never have anything to do with their family and just drink and drink and drink. And as I mentioned before, that was the perfect place. You got food. Uh, there was always something: meatball sandwiches, hot dogs and beans, all during the week. It opened at 6 o'clock and it closed at 11. And 2 pool tables. Back in those days, the bars didn't have all these flat screen TVs. You had a little like 19-inch screen at the end of the bar, and if you were watching a game or uh, anything on television. I can remember when they had the peace talks with Vietnam, and they were arguing about a square table or round table, who was going to sit where. And they it couldn't have any angle, right angles, because someone would have to sit at the end, both ends, and they couldn't make up their mind who that would be. So they had a round table. I remember sitting at one end of the bar, which was closer to the men's room, because I always peed a lot, and I'd squint like this, even with glasses, because TV was so small by today's standards. I went. I went out last night and I had eggplant parmesan at an Italian restaurant. Two guys from Italy, and there had to be 20 or 30 television screens in there, plus a jukebox. You paid by the album. You listened to a whole album. Um, so even as a whole group, we were isolating. We were isolating ourselves from the world. All these guys that drank too much, avoiding family, avoiding conflicts, and it looked like we were all getting along. And it was kind of like kids in a little sandbox. You think, oh, look at them, they're all playing together. Well, they were having parallel play. They didn't give a shit about the next kid. They're just playing by themselves. And that's the kind of world that being an alcoholic it formed in me. I thought that was the greatest life ever. Going to the bar, staying as long as you could, and I always walked home. I didn't have a car, and I avoid getting a car because I didn't want to have any DUIs on my record, and I never was arrested, never had a problem with police, and yet, I, I mean, you should have told me something that you could put your name on the board and let your wife or loved one know that you tell her you weren't there. That was abnormal. But because that's where I went all the time, I thought it was a normal thing, and I didn't see all the guys going out with their kids and taking them fishing and stuff like that. It kind of builds on itself. You hang around with alcoholics, and then you think it's normal. First, am I the only one that's got a problem with alcoholics? Then you find a place to go, and bingo, you fit right in. You think this is normal. That's what it was. That's definitely the way it was for me. My first step in recovery was to fully concede to our innermost self that I was an alcoholic. So I hope you got something out of that. I kind of ranted and raved, but I wish you all the best. Stay safe, stay sober, and we will see you tomorrow.